Welcome everyone to Icon. My name's Dan and I'm a pastor here and really excited to be with you guys this morning. 2019 has kicked off to be a great year here at Icon. I hope your year is starting off really well. We just wrapped up a series called Control-Alt-Delete where we talked about kind of how to reboot your life in the new year and how to get a fresh start. And it was a great series, specifically last week. I don't know how many of you were able to be here last week, but Steve Cochran, one of our pastors on staff here, spoke last week, and it was phenomenal. If you missed last week, I'd really encourage you to go online and listen to it or watch it. All of our sermons are available online. And if you were here last week, specifically in second service, you really got a treat. You see, because in Steve's message, if you missed it last week, you missed out on something. Because in Steve's message, he was talking about in life, sometimes it feels like we're carrying this heavy weight around, and everywhere we go, this weight is bearing down on us. So earlier in the week, he had talked to me and said, hey, I have an idea for kind of a visual illustration for this. What if I get an actual backpack, like one of those huge hiking packs, and I put that on, and I'm like wearing it around for most of the message? And I told him, I was like, dude, I think that's a great idea. The thing is, it's got to actually like be heavy, because people can tell if you know, how you're carrying it and stuff, if it's light or if it's heavy. And to translate it, when you set it down, it really has to have some weight. And Steve replied, and he was like, no, I'm not about that life, right? And he was like, no, I don't want to actually carry something heavy. So he filled it with pillows, right? So you thought Steve was identifying with you last week, carrying that heavy weight. He's a liar, right? It was all pillows in the bag, right? And I was like, that's so lame. He's like, no, I'm not about like sweating on stage and like carrying this heavy pack for the whole message. And then after first service, Dino, one of our other pastors on staff, came up to me and had a brilliant idea. And he said, Dan, what if we put a little bit of weight in his backpack, right? And our thought was, right, we add a little bit of weight for second service, just enough where he's like, that's weird, that feels a little heavier, right? And then in third service, we really weighed it down, right? Only we got a little overambitious and added a little too many bricks in his backpack. And when he put it on, well, it was immediately noticeable that we had put a lot of weight in his backpack. And I thought, if you missed it, man, you missed a great opportunity, because this is one of my favorite messages of all time, just for this one moment. So Steve, I hope you're okay with this. We got a clip of Steve last week almost being knocked over by his backpack. So why don't you go ahead and check this out.
This is kind of what it felt like this week. It felt like I just have this weight on my shoulders. Now, I just have to pause this message for a second, because this bag was not this heavy last service. So somebody is messing with me, and they put a lot of weight in this bag. But here I am, the week from hell. Whoever did this, I promise, we're no longer friends. But here we go.
Oh, man, that was amazing. That was one of the highlights of my year already, just watching it. I was like crying during service. And what made it better is like he had to wear that for the whole message. It's like beads of sweat started like building up on his head. He's like, no, I felt sorry because people like hugged me after service and I'm a sweaty mess. Like, no, that was not a win. And I disagree. But now the downside is I have to like live in fear on like Steve paying me back. And I know he's going to wait just long enough for me to forget. And Steve, I just want you to remember, it was Dino's idea. So if you want to like get back at him, let me know. We can work together on that. So it was a great week, and it was a lot of fun. We like to have fun around this place. But I'm also excited about what we're talking about today. I'm really excited about this because what we're going to be talking about today has had a huge impact on my life. It's one of the things that has made one of the larger impacts on my day-to-day life more than anything else. And it's something that, quite honestly, we don't talk about a whole lot. In fact, I looked, and the last time we talked about this idea, it was back in 2014. We were only a few months old as a church. We had just started. And that was the last time that we talked about this idea. And yet it's made this huge impact on my life. And I want to get us all on kind of the same page, because I think it's something that not just I have dealt with before. I think it's something that we kind of all feel from time to time. So I've got a list of questions, and I want you to think about, in your own life, in your own experience, have you ever felt this way? So let me ask you, do you ever feel pressure because you have so much to do? Or how about this? Do you ever feel like you're just too busy? Right? When someone asks you, man, how are you doing? How's life? Your response is, man, I'm busy, right? It's like, oh, just so busy, so many things. Or how about this? Do you ever feel anxiety about trying to keep all the plates spinning? You know what I mean? Like there's all these things you got to get going. If you have a family, if you have kids, maybe you feel like you're like the cruise director and you got to make sure everyone's always entertained and all the plates are spinning and school is good and practices are good and family is good and your job is good. You ever feel that? Or how about these questions? Do you ever feel like you have multiple full-time jobs, right? Like work, family, home, kids, school, sports, hobbies. Like it's almost as if every one of those could be like a 40-hour job and it's still not get enough of your attention. You ever feel like that? There's just so many things going on. Or how about this? Are you stressed because of how much you have to do? Or lastly, you find yourself dreaming about when the next break is or looking forward to sleep at night, right? Like that one's definitely me, right? Like I lay down in bed at night and I'm like, this is the best time of the night, right? Like this is the highlight of my day. Is like laying in bed and it's silent and it's dark and there's like, that's it. Like that's the best, right? You ever feel that way before? You're so busy, so stressed. You feel this weight on you. I know for me, I find myself there more often than not. And what you find yourself doing a lot of times and what we're not going to do today is I'm not going to give you like 5 tips on overcoming this. Like 3 tips to de-stress or 5 ways that you can get rid of the stress in your life. Because you know what that is? That ends up being more stuff we have to do, right? Then we feel this pressure of like, well, I suck at that too, right? I'm not doing that, and it's just one more plate to keep spinning. You see, the problem is we try to do ourselves out of this. We just try to do more and work our way out of this. But I believe the solution is more perspective than it is prescriptive. Right? Prescriptive is do this. Here's the prescription to fix this. Here's what you have to do. And it ends up being more effort. I believe that the change comes when I've experienced change in this. It's been because my perspective has shifted. I've changed how I think about something, how I respond to something. You see, for me, I can remember back to a time in my life and early on in Kelly and I's marriage that quite honestly, I'd become a workaholic. I would work and I would come home. As soon as I would get home, I'd open up the laptop and I'd just keep working. I'd stop just long enough maybe to eat dinner, and then I'd go back to the laptop and I'd keep working. And I noticed this creeped into me for several reasons. One, because I think culture beats this into us, that achieve, work, do more, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Also, I found myself in a position with a lot of leadership at a very young age. I felt so far in over my head that more was required of me than I even knew and I realized. It didn't help that early on I made a really big budgetary mistake, and I lived with this weight that I feel like I had to prove myself, right? Like I had to prove the critics wrong. You ever felt that before? You just feel like you have to achieve. You got to just keep working. You got to keep doing more and more. And I found myself finding value in that, right? Like I'm worthy because look what I can produce, right? You ever felt that before? And I want to ask you a question that maybe you've never asked yourself point blank, a question maybe you haven't thought about like actively, but probably persists somewhere in the back of your head. I want to ask you, what about you adds value to this world? What about you adds value to this world? You see, because how I answered this question early in my ministry, early in my marriage, is how I brought value to this earth, to this world, was by my job, was by my career, by being a pastor. I directed a school, and if my students did really well after school, then I was enough, right? Then I was achieving, then I was adding value to this world. I was valuable, I was worthy. If the budget did well, if I was a good steward with money, if the program grew, if more students came, then I was being successful. Then I had value. You see, this mentality can creep into everything. As I was thinking between services, I even thought back to different seasons of this church. In an honest moment, there were times early on in the church that I measured my value by who showed up each morning. Or I found my value after I finished talking. I would get done and the day would be kind of getting done. I'm wrapping up, packing everything up, and I'm leaving. And I found myself going to social media to see what people said. That I found my value by what other people said about me. See, where do you find your value? What about you brings value to this world? You see, we can find it in several different places. We can find our value in our work, in our relationships, in our parenting, in all these different ways that we find value in earning enough. See, it's part of the American dream. What we idolize is the winners, the people that come from humble beginnings. They pull themselves up by their bootstraps and they're enough, and those are the people we elevate. But we need to understand, I want you all to understand this idea that our worth as humans is not derived by what we produce. That's not where your worth comes from. You see, and we know this inherently, right? Like if we had an honest conversation, let's say you have two different kids, and one of your children excels in academics. They're just a whiz. They breeze through school getting straight A's. School academics just comes easy to them. And they get praise from teachers, administrators. And then if you were to have another child that is challenged when it comes to academics, that doesn't come easily to them, that's a struggle for them, would you say that one child is worth more, is more valuable than the other child? Of course not. We wouldn't think that way in this world. If you were to see a high-priced, high-power CEO and a homeless man, you wouldn't say that one has more value than the other. You wouldn't look at the wealthy CEO and say, man, she's really valuable, but this homeless person, he has no value. Of course we wouldn't say that. It's like we know this intrinsically, and it's like we would say this in a conversation, but when it becomes about us, when it becomes our lived experience, sometimes we believe a lie that says we are as valuable as the amount that we can produce. And that mentality is deeply ingrained in all of our subconscious. And I was trying to think about this idea. And I was trying to think what it kind of is related to, what it's similar to, what it's like. And quite honestly, it's really like a slavery mentality. It's like we're treating ourselves like we're slaves. Because a slave's value is in what they can produce. They're a tool, they're a machine. And if there's one slave that can produce a lot and one slave that can produce very little, then it's very clear which is more valuable. And it's as if we're treating ourselves like we're slaves to our own production. And that mentality in us saying, you're as valuable as what you can produce. You've got a great marriage, man, good job. You got great kids, you're raising great children, the world cheers at that. You produce a lot, you become wealthy, you're able to do a lot in your community, you work hard, then you have value. But then this creeping thought gets into your head that what happens when you lose that job? What happens if your spouse walks out? What happens if your children make poor choices? If you make a mistake and you lose finances, what then? Is the value still there? If only there was like a counter narrative to this, right? If only there was something else saying, no, that's not the truth. And we actually can find this in the words of God. See, there was a time in Israel's ancient history, thousands and thousands of years ago. Israel spent 400 years as slaves in Egypt. This mentality was deeply ingrained in them. Think about it. America is 242 years old. Imagine 400 years of slavery. And there's generations of people being raised with this value that you are only as worthy as the amount of bricks that you can produce. The more bricks you can make, the more valuable you are. And Israel grew up in this culture, grew up with this understanding. And then God brought them out of slavery. And he needed to remind them, your value is not in what you produce. So he gave them a command. He reminded them of something that was as old as time, that we see in creation, that we see in nature all around us, that there are rhythms of rest. It's everywhere. We can see it in nature with day and night, with the seasons. We can see it in agriculture, that the land must lay fallow for it to be able to produce more. There are seasons of rest, and God called this Sabbath. And even as God gave us the example and as God rested, he wanted to remind the people to take a day, to take time to honor that Sabbath, to be reminded. These are the words of God as Israel comes out of slavery and he gives them this command. It's found in Deuteronomy. He says, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. As the Lord your God has commanded you, 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And this is important because he tells them this, and right after this, he's going to tell them why. And if we miss the why, we miss everything. We've got to understand the purpose behind this rule, behind this command, behind this law. God reveals it. We can read it in verse 15. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. It says, remember you were once slaves, but no more. Remember, at one point, your value was tied to what you can produce, by the work you do, by the bricks you can make. But I tell you no more. You have inherent, intrinsic value in who you are. Sabbath reminds all of us that we're human beings, not human doings. Your value isn't tied in what you do. It's in who you are. And this shift in perspective can change everything. See, it's not a prescription, do these things. It's, no, change my attitude, change my perspective, realize that my value isn't in all the stuff of life. And this should drive every single one of us to this moment where I want you all to say, you know, enough with the bricks. Enough with trying to achieve. Enough with trying to prove myself. I'm done with the bricks. I'm done with that old way of life. And I'm going to find my value in who I am. And I'm going to listen to what God says about me. You see, Sabbath is a change in perspective. It's about looking at things differently. And this is a struggle. This is a challenge. Like you heard me say, I've gone back and forth on this. I got to constantly remind myself, because even in my body, I'm addicted to like the adrenaline rush of doing, right? Is anybody else weird like me? Like sometimes if I have to do something, if I have to make a call, I'll like put it on my list just so I can check it off, right? Because that, like I love getting to check that off to feel accomplished. I love looking at a list and knocking all of it out. Honestly, I still have this issue. I can walk out of a day where I didn't meet with a single person, but I checked a bunch of stuff off and I walk out of that day feeling like that was a good day. And then I can also have days, and this is super messed up. I'm a pastor, guys. I'm like about people, right? That I meet with people all day long. And I'm like talking to them, and I'm, you know, we're got like, they're pouring their heart out, and I walk out, and I'm like, I didn't get anything done today. Like it was a total waste of a day, right? Like even in my body, like I'm addicted to that. All of us have this gravitational pull to achieving and earning. And look what I can do. See, so you're going to fight against this. You're going to have to push yourself into this and learn to accept the grace of doing nothing. Then you have to embrace it long enough that you quit squirming and fighting it. Because initially, when you start doing Sabbath, when there's rhythms of that in your life, you're going to feel this like pull to like do something. I feel so lazy, I got to do something. Have you ever done this? You're like standing in line. You know what we used to do like 10, 15 years ago when we stood in line? We'd stand in line. We'd just like be there. And if we're really crazy, we might talk to somebody. What do we do now when we're standing in line? Look, and when you're in the grocery store, look at the lines. You know what people are doing? This, right? Just mindlessly scrolling, doing something. I know I'm not the only crazy one out there. Like I'll just be sitting there. I might be eating a meal. And instead of like actually tasting my food and enjoying it, I'm like, gotta do something. Right now, like grab the phone, we gotta do constantly, right? You're gonna feel this like squirming, this fight against that. We've gotta shift our perspective. Because when we live our lives going, achieving, doing, it tells us that that's where our worth is found. So what happens if life changes and you can't achieve in that same way? What happens when you lose that job? What happens when something changes in your life? Then it tells us, I'm not as valuable. See, Sabbath exists to set slaves free. And when we're slaves to our own achievement, when we're slaves to our own work, when we're slaves to just do more, Sabbath exists to set us free from that. And what's so insidious about this kind of mentality of working and achieving is it creeps its way into so many areas of our lives without us ever realizing it. You see, it's not just about your job. It shows up all over the place. And what I want to do is I want to maybe give you some ideas, some ways in which this Sabbath idea might move into different areas of your life, where you can move from a place of restlessness to restfulness. So how do I move from restlessness to restfulness? So I want to help change your perspective on several different areas of where this idea of Sabbath can show up. One, Sabbath can show up in your parenting and how you raise your kids. Do you see in them that drive that you see in yourself? That they find their value in getting good enough grades and winning at the game and achieving and going? Is your life as a parent go, 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 achieve, do? Or is there times of taking a break? Are there seasons of rest where you can just be? Do your kids feel that? I was talking to a friend recently, and he shared about they're passionate. They're, like my wife and I, when we go to my kids' basketball game, I'm like in it to win it, right? Like I am all about it. And so were they, and they were in it, and they were cheering for their kid. And after the game, their kid came off the court, and he was in tears. He said, Dad, I tried so hard. I was listening to you. You just kept yelling, and I was trying to do everything you were saying, but it just felt like you just kept yelling at me. See, sometimes our encouragement to our young children can feel like expectation, can feel like you've got to achieve. And in no way was that father's intention, but he had to realize how that was being communicated. You see, how we live our lives communicates more to our children than we realize. And if they never see us rest, it will be communicated to them there is a value in working and never stopping. And that part in you that feels guilty when you rest will be birthed into them as well. See, Sabbath needs to show up in our parenting. That we find times that all the devices are just turned off. That we are available to each other, and that's it. We're not available to the outside world. We are only available to those closest to us, to those we love. That your kids know that they have all of you. Sabbath can show up in your parenting. Sabbath can also show up in all kinds of relationships, and friendships, and in romantic relationships with your spouse. How do they feel when they're around you? Do they feel like there's always a list? There's always more that they need to do? That they're not enough? If they'd only change this about themselves, they'd only change that they got to do better at this, that they got to quit forgetting those things, that there's this honey-do list that's never done? Do you feel that kind of pressure that you've got to be better for that other person? Your friendship circles, they're always tearing you down, always saying these things that you need to get better, get a real job, all these things, and you're like, I just don't feel like I'm enough. See, Sabbath needs to creep into our relationships as well. That we let people know that they are fully loved right how they are. In a relationship, we need to feel like we are loved and accepted as we are. And you know what? When I feel that love and acceptance from Kelly, that I'm loved just how I am, and all my weirdness and all my odd damnness, like in that moment, you know what that does? That drives me. I want to be better. I want to serve her more. I want to show her love. I want to follow her lead. I want to submit to who she is as well. And in that mutual submission, that is a picture of love. See, we've got to allow Sabbath into our relationships and not set all these expectations for those around us. Because what that communicates is you're not enough. You're not quite enough where you're at. You got to do more. You got to be better. And Sabbath needs to show up in our work and our creating. In our work life, our work, when we're there, when we're present, we need to be fully present. Your work to get the best of you needs all of you. And your work cannot get all of you when you're fractured and splintered and tired and exhausted and giving a little bit here and a little bit there because you never rest. You see, work to get the best of you sometimes needs to get none of you. For this church, For you to get the best of me as your pastor, there needs to be seasons where you can't reach me, where I'm unavailable because I'm not your savior. I can't fix you. So there needs to be seasons that your work can't get you, that you're unavailable. In the same way that farmers would understand, you can't just plant the same thing over and over in a field and expect it to keep producing to the same degree. I grew up in central Illinois where that's all there was farms. It's like corn and soybeans, and that's it. And there were some seasons where you'd go by a field and there was nothing there, that the land needed to rest. In the same way, our work, there needs to be seasons where we rest. And if you're creative in this room, if that's where you derive your, work from, that you're kind of a creative, you're creating things, whether it's photography or whether it's art or whether it's graphic design or whatever it is, art needs spaces in it. Music needs rest. If music was just all constant sound all the time and there was no rest, there was no rhythm, that's just noise. So sometimes when you're creating, the best thing you can do is walk away from it and just let it be and let it rest. See, there's those seasons and those rhythms of rest that need to be in all areas of our lives. But Sabbath needs to also show up in our relationship with God. I want you to think about how you respond to when you think about God. Like what happens in your brain when someone brings up God? What happens when you show up at church? Are you more likely when you come to church to kind of hang your head? Ashamed of what you did last night or last week or last month or last year? Thinking of all the things you did do or all the things you didn't do? When you think about your relationship with God, you think, man, it's not much of a relationship. I need to pray more. I need to read the Bible more. I need to do this more. I need to, and you think of all these things you're not doing. What is that? It's achievement, right? That's doing stuff, right? Is that ever what the gospel has ever been about? If you do enough, if you work hard enough, you can get close to God? No, the beauty of it is that we have a God that draws near to us in all of our mess and all of our imperfectness. We have to shift our perspective that you don't achieve to get God's favor in your life. That you are loved and accepted just as you are. And in the same way, in my relationship with my wife, that pushes us. We want to draw closer to Him then. We want to do better. We want to shift and change, but it's not coming from a place of achievement and working hard enough to earn it. We need to feel that love from God and allow that idea of Sabbath to seep into every place of our lives. So like I said, today I'm not giving you this list of do all of these things, because then that's just more plates to spin. What I want you to know is today I want you to know that you are enough. You are enough. Just as you are. You are loved by God. Allow Sabbath to give you some rest. Allow yourself to rest in that. Allow that to bring healing into your life. We got to tell ourselves, we've got to come to a moment where we draw a line in the sand and we say, enough with the bricks, enough with the achievement and the working and the stuff, enough finding my value in that. I am enough. My friends, my family, my loved ones, they are enough. Today, we're going to close. The band is going to play a couple of songs. And I think it's appropriate that it's just kind of this chilled out acoustic set because we don't have to produce, right? We can just rest and know that we're enough just as we are. And you see, for me, I got to remind myself of this because, again, I feel that gravitational pull. So for me, back when I really kind of had to come to this moment and face up and for myself say enough with the bricks for the first time, I started getting quotes and different things that I'd remind myself of. And I understand that Sabbath is like a super weird word that we never use, right? You wouldn't go to your boss and be like, hey, can I take Sabbath on Thursday? He'd be like, what is wrong with you, right? So I get it, that's a weird word. But for me, I had to call it that. Because if I called it in my brain, if I said, hey, I'm going to take a day off, that felt too lazy. I was that messed up. So for me, I needed that. I needed that framework to help me. So how we're going to close is I'm going to read you some quotes about Sabbath that have helped me. And I want you to do this. Everybody, go ahead and just close your eyes. And I want you just to listen to these words and listen and notice what happens inside of you. Just listen to this and let this, in a sense, kind of wash over you. On the Sabbath, we are remembering that our relationship with God did not begin with what we've done. It is not sustained by what we do, and it is not guaranteed to the end by our effort or our work. God is in the Sabbath, telling us we are loved just as we are, and we don't have to work for it. Sabbath reminds us that efficiency is not God's highest priority. Sabbath is a full-scale rebellion against Western American culture, which bows down at the altar of get it done and make it happen. And God won't punish you for working through or not honoring Sabbath. However, the unholy trinity of hurry, worry, and busy will. To gain control of the world of space is certainly one of our tasks. The danger, however, begins when, in gaining power in the realm of space, we forfeit all aspirations in the realm of time. There is a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be. Not to own, but to give. Not to control, but to share. Not to subdue, but to be in accord. Life goes wrong when the control of space, the acquisition of things of space, becomes our sole concern. 6 days a week, we wrestle with the world, wringing profit from the earth. On the Sabbath, we especially care for the seed of eternity planted in the soul. The world has our hands, but our soul belongs to someone else. 6 days a week, we seek to dominate the world. And on the seventh, we seek to dominate the self. So God, we thank you for the Sabbath that you gave us for our sake. It's not a list of rules or regulations. As your son Jesus said, man was not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath for man. So Lord, I pray that no one would walk out of here thinking, man, I got to do that better. They would change their perspective. They would see the ways in which Sabbath can move into their lives when it comes to parenting, when it comes to relationships and work, and even in their relationship with you. Lord, I pray that people would walk out of this room realizing that they are enough, that they are fully known, the best parts and the worst parts. But at the same time, may they know that they are fully loved. So God, may all of us pray a prayer, say to ourselves, enough with the bricks. May we experience Sabbath in our lives. We thank you for these things, and we pray this in your name. And everyone said,